What's the biggest lie you told just to get intimate with someone? Story 1. This isn't what happened to me, but it involves someone I used to be friends with, and it still bothers me years later. So, this guy was dating a girl who genuinely seemed sweet and a bit naive. After a while, she suddenly reached out to me out of nowhere, crying and asking if he was okay. I was confused. She was genuinely worried he might have died. That's when I found out the whole twisted story. Turns out, my friend told her he had terminal cancer and only had 2 months to live. He played the whole sympathy card hard, fake tears, emotional talks, the works. She believed him. She cried, comforted him, and eventually, she gave in and started sleeping with him, thinking she was helping him live out his last days with love and comfort. For 2 months they were together constantly. She even fell for him, hard. Then, once he got bored, he ghosted her. Just vanished. No explanation, no closure. That's when she found my number, contacted me, and asked if he had really passed away, and my heart just dropped. The guy was alive, totally healthy. When I confronted him about it, he laughed. Laughed and said I should just block her and move on, and that it was an easy trick I should try sometime. That was the final straw. I cut him off completely and never spoke to him again. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I'm not a regular liar, but when I was younger, I definitely bent the truth here and there if it meant getting a date or making things go smoother with a guy I liked. One of the most ridiculous and honestly kind of impressive moments happened during my freshman year of college. There was this cute guy in my poetry class who asked me out. Casual, nothing crazy, just a Saturday night hang. But then he asked if I had a car. Since he didn't, without thinking, I smiled and said, "Yeah, I've got one. I will pick you up." Small problem. I did not have a car or a license. I went home that night in full panic mode, borrowed my mom's car to practice, and then crammed like it was finals week for my driving test. I scheduled it immediately, passed it with laser focus, and borrowed her car for our date all within a few days. He never found out. He just thought I was super chill and conveniently had a car. Meanwhile, I was out there scrambling behind the scenes just to keep the illusion alive. Probably the most chaotic preparation I've ever done just to go out with someone, but hey, the date went great. Story 3. This one still makes me cringe. I was at a music festival and met this girl who was an aspiring filmmaker. She told me her dream was to move to LA and get into independent cinema. I was 2 beers in and trying to impress her, so I casually said, "Oh yeah, I actually produced an indie short that made it into a few smaller festivals." I had never produced anything in my life. The closest I'd come to film was editing a meme with iMovie. But she got all wide-eyed and excited, asking what it was called. I panicked and said, "It's not online. It's more of an underground thing, invite-only screenings. AKA it doesn't exist." She wanted to know what it was about. So I made up some artsy nonsense like, "It's a commentary on the cycle of identity through the lens of a man who can only see in sepia after a brain injury." She called it genius, and we ended up spending the night together in her tent. A month later, she messaged me on Instagram, asking if I'd be willing to mentor her through her thesis film. I told her I was between projects, and never responded again. I'm not proud, but damn it, the fake film producer persona had a solid 24-hour run. Story 4. I was once on a Tinder date with a girl who told me she was really into paranormal stuff, like full-blown ghost hunter mode. She was cute, so when she asked if I believed in spirits, I hit her with, "Oh, 100%. Actually, I see them sometimes." "I do not." She was immediately intrigued. I started spinning this wild tale about how I used to live in a haunted house as a kid, how I saw a Civil War soldier standing at the foot of my bed, and how I once had a full conversation with my grandma's ghost while brushing my teeth. She was so into it, asking follow-up questions like, "Do they come to you when you're vulnerable?" And I was like, "Yeah, mostly when I am half asleep, or when I've just got laid." Something about spiritual openness. I don't know why that worked, but somehow it did. After we banged, she asked if I could sense anything in her apartment. I stood in the corner pretending to get goosebumps and said, "Your great aunt wants you to call your mom." The next day, she texted me, "OMG, I talked to my mom, and she literally mentioned Aunt Carol. I ghosted her, ironically. Story 5. So, there was this insanely hot girl I met, the kind of girl that makes you consider abandoning your entire belief system just for a chance. But she was super devout, like Jesus is my co-pilot level religious. Meanwhile, I'm a full-on atheist, not the angry kind, just the read the Bible didn't buy it kind. But at the moment I decided to become her dream guy. Suddenly, I was a Christ-loving man who had devoted his life to the church. I made up a story about going on a missionary trip to Africa and even watched YouTube videos about missionary work, so I could sound convincing when she asked questions. I used just the right amount of vague language and soul-searchy phrases, and it worked. We slept together. Mission accomplished, or so I thought. About 15 minutes later, she walks out of my living room holding my signed copy of The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, just standing there, staring at me like I had kicked a puppy. I couldn't even think of a good excuse. All I managed was a weak, haha, yeah, crap. Definitely not my proudest moment, but in my defense, she was really hot. Story 6. I lied to my teacher that I wasn't one of her students. In my high school, there was a young floating substitute teacher, Miss C, and she was fine. I fantasized about her a lot and would do anything for her. Well, at 19, as a screw-up, I ended up getting into some trouble and checked out of that high school to get my GED. Yeah, I know, real winner here. Anyway, later that year, it might have been for Easter, there was a church bazaar at the church that I grew up going to. I really didn't go to church at that point, but went to meet my mom and sisters for something, and decided to hang out. They had carnival games, food, and even beer. Well, lo and behold, Miss Key was there, and I took a chance and started chatting her up, hanging out with her, even buying her and me a beer because I looked older than I was. That day was wild. I was actually winning carnival games, which was definitely a sign that the universe was on my side because I sucked at sports. I couldn't hit the side of a barn with a basketball normally, but that day I was on fire. She even said, "Do I know you from somewhere? How old are you? Are you sure you're not one of my students?" I said that I was 21 and from another side of town. Well, the day goes by, and by this time we both got a buzz. She mentioned that she was in the process of moving, that she had just signed a lease at these new apartments that had just opened up. I acted impressed and said that I was also thinking about getting a place there and had been meaning to check them out. Now, rumor had it she was married, but her husband cheated on her, so they had just separated. I knew this, but she didn't know that I knew. She was like, "It's really nice. You want to come see it?" Boom. I was in. We went to her new apartment. It was pretty much empty, except for some moving boxes. And just like that, things escalated. And there on the carpet, we got down. I had a truck and ended up moving her in completely. And we did it countless times in about a month's time. She taught me a lot. I think she used me as a rebound also, because I had a truck, as much as I used lied to her. Story 7. Years ago, my ex got super drunk and hooked up with one of her coworkers. To her credit, she confessed a few days later. But honestly, that didn't make it any better. We broke up, and while she seemed to genuinely regret it, she couldn't understand why I wouldn't just get over it and take her back. Spoiler, I absolutely couldn't. Fast forward a few years, I've moved on, living in a new place, a new number, everything. One night, I randomly ran into her at a bar. She gets all flirty and asks if I've forgiven her. I tell her yes, play it cool, and even imply that I still have some feelings, maybe even be open to trying again. I didn't at all. I hadn't forgiven a single thing, but I kept up the act, and we ended the night back at her place. The next morning, while she was still sleeping, I quietly got dressed, slipped out the door and disappeared. Still had her blocked, no way to reach me, no follow-up, nothing. Heard through mutuals later that she was really hurt and felt like she was used. That was absolutely the point. Definitely not one of my prouder moments, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a little satisfied. Story 8. Met this insanely attractive girl through a friend, and we hit it off pretty quickly. After hanging out a few times and making out, she hit me with the deal breaker. "I really like you, but I can't sleep with you unless you're Jewish." Now, I'm not Jewish, not even a little, but I also wasn't about to let that stand in the way of what I thought was going to be a good thing. So, obviously, I said, Yeah, of course I'm Jewish. She was thrilled. To sell it, I even dug up a picture from my cousin's wedding when I was 13, suit, yarmulke, the whole vibe, and told her it was from my bar mitzvah. She totally bought it. We dated for about a month, which basically meant fooling around a lot while I continued living the lie. Everything was going fine until she brought it up to a mutual friend, who immediately burst out laughing and said, "He is 100% not Jewish." Yeah, she was not amused. The lie crashed and burned instantly, and so did the whole thing we had going on. Definitely one of the dumbest lies I've told. 10/10 do not recommend. Story 9. My brother-in-law has one of the strangest how we met stories I've ever heard. He lost his keys at a club one night after a bit too much partying. While he was trying to figure out what to do, this girl he had been chatting with earlier in the night swooped in and offered to let him crash at her place. It seemed like a kind gesture at the time, until he found out later that she didn't just find his keys. She straight up took them on purpose so she could have a reason to take him home. It was a bold, slightly insane move. But hey, apparently it worked, because they're now married with a kid. Story 10. I once told a girl I had herpes when I absolutely did not. We had been talking for a while, and during a pretty serious conversation she opened up and told me she had it. She also mentioned she was on meds and hadn't had an outbreak in years. I could tell she was nervous about how I'd react, so in the moment, not wanting to make her feel bad or lose the chance with someone I really liked, I just nodded and said, "Yeah, same here, it's not a big deal." Total lie. Fast forward to the first time we got intimate. I went down on her downtown area, but not before doing the most thorough, discreet visual inspection I've ever done in my life. Everything looked fine. And then, well, my second head took over. No rubber was used, and logic flew out the window. Then I had the most intense post-peak clarity of my life. I spent hours researching online, absolutely spiraling, and ended up seeing my doctor. Thankfully, he reassured me that if she's on meds, hasn't had outbreaks. And I start taking preventive meds too. The risk is super low, so I did, for the entire 6 months we dated. Honestly, no regrets. It was a great relationship while it lasted. But yeah, I do hope she didn't go around telling anyone I have herpes. That might be a fun surprise for my future self one day. Story 11. This one's from a one-night stand I had, and honestly, it still makes me shake my head. The girl I hooked up with really wanted to do it without protection. Now, I'd already made up my mind years before that I would never do that with a one-night stand. So, before anything happened, I asked if she had been tested recently. She confidently said, "Yeah, no worries." Even after hearing that, I wasn't about to take any chances and still used protection. I figured it was better safe than sorry. Fast forward 2 days, and out of the blue, she texts me saying she just found out she tested positive for chlamydia. I was shocked, honestly. I couldn't believe she'd said she was clean, and then told me that after the fact. Then, as luck would have it, I ran into her in person not long after receiving that message. So I confronted her, kept my cool but was direct. I asked how she could keep something like that from me, especially since she knew I was careful. She tried to explain that she didn't know her previous partner had chlamydia and that's probably how she caught it. I listened, but I didn't buy it. I told her it was incredibly selfish to put someone else at risk like that and basically told her to go screw herself. Story 12. I met a girl at a bar who had just returned from a trip to Europe and would not stop talking about Paris. So naturally, when she asked if I spit ever been, I said, "Oh yeah, I lived there for a year." No, I didn't. I barely passed high school French. But for the next 2 hours, I made up stories about croissants and my favorite little spot in Montmartre. I even threw in a fake ex-girlfriend named Amélie because it sounded French enough. When she asked if I could speak the language, I hit her with a very confident "oui on peut" and just kept quoting lines from Ratatouille when things got too real. We hooked up that night, and in the morning she handed me a book in French and said, "Can you translate the first page for me?" I stared at it like I was going blind and mumbled something about how the true meaning of French literature can be translated literally. Then I excused myself and never looked back. Story 13. Back in college, I was at this small house party when I got talking to a girl who was very into clean eating, yoga, and all things holistic. Meanwhile, I had just eaten a Hot Pocket and a handful of mini M&Ms for dinner. She mentioned how attractive she found guys who are gluten-free and plant-based, saying something like, "It just shows self-discipline and mindfulness." So naturally, I nodded and said, "Oh yeah, I've been gluten-free for like 3 years now." It really changed my energy levels. I spent the rest of the night Googling whether beer had gluten. It did, and pretending my glass of Bud Light was some ancient fermented rice beverage. I even avoided the pizza at the party, claiming I had brought a quinoa protein bar, which was just a Nature Valley one I had peeled the wrapper off of. Anyway, I somehow sold it. We ended up hooking up, and I spent the next week avoiding gluten publicly around her, while secretly eating breadsticks in my car. We fizzled out after a few dates, but to this day, I still think about how I basically created a whole fake dietary lifestyle just to get laid. Story 14. I was at a friend's barbecue when I met this girl who was gorgeous and wearing a shirt that said, "Adopt, don't shop." Within 5 minutes of talking, she brings up how she only dates guys who are good with animals, especially rescue dogs. Naturally, I nodded and said, "Oh yeah, I volunteer at the local shelter every Sunday. I'm actually kind of known there for calming the aggressive ones, but in reality I'm terrified of dogs, especially big ones. I got chased by a German Shepherd as a kid and never recovered. But I went all in." I told her a story about how a pit bull named Muffin once bit my wrist, and I just calmly whispered to it until it let go. She was hooked. We went back to her place and banged, surrounded by 3 rescue dogs, by the way. I spent the entire next morning frozen in place on her couch, while her Rottweiler named Goose just stared at me like he knew I was a fraud. We never hung out again. I told her I was switching shelters and didn't want to confuse the dogs with new scents. Story 15. This girl I met on Hinge was deeply into astrology. Like, I would not date you if your Mars was in the wrong house level serious. Right off the bat, she asked for my birth time and place so she could check our compatibility. I didn't even know my birth time, so I guessed. Then I looked up our signs and literally studied astrology cheat sheets like I was cramming for finals. I told her I was a Virgo rising, which made me emotionally meticulous, and that our signs were aligned for passion but also karmic growth. She was mesmerized. I nodded wisely every time she talked about Mercury retrograde, like I didn't just Google that 2 hours before. We ended up sleeping together a few days later, and for a while I kept the astrology gig going. But eventually, she asked me to go to an astro alignment circle with her friends. I panicked and told her my Saturn return was kicking in and I needed to retreat for personal reflection. She actually respected that. Astrology saved me from astrology. Story 16. There was this girl in my art class who was obsessed with left-handed people. She said they were more creative, emotionally deep, and mysterious. I, being extremely right-handed and extremely down bad, casually said, "Oh yeah, I'm left-handed." The lie seemed harmless at first, until she said we should go to this wine and paint date night, where you paint each other's portraits. I was holding the paintbrush in my offhand like a toddler, using chopsticks for the first time. I blamed the wine and said, "Sometimes my strokes get chaotic when I sip inspired." She called it raw. We slept together that night. For the next few weeks, I had to switch hands for everything when I was around her, eating, texting, holding her hand. Eventually, I pulled a long, dramatic sigh and told her I was ambidextrous but conflicted. She loved that even more. Story 17. I was on a date, and it was going okay, but I could tell she wasn't super impressed. So when she asked, "What's the scariest thing you've ever been through?" I panicked and said, "I drowned once." She gasped, and I ran with it. I told her I'd fallen into a frozen lake, flatlined for 30 seconds, and saw a glowing tunnel and my grandma holding a corgi. She teared up and said it was the most spiritual thing she'd ever heard. We ended up doing it that night, and after, she looked at me like I was some fragile soul who had glimpsed the afterlife. For the next few weeks, I kept the near-death persona alive. I talked about how every moment is precious, how I feel water is both healing and terrifying, and how I journal with my post-drowning clarity. Eventually, I had to fake PTSD every time we passed a swimming pool. It got too exhausting, so I faded out. but for a while I was basically the ghost of her wet dream. Story 18. When I first started dating this girl, she was 9 years younger than me, and clearly a bit insecure about her experience level compared to mine. Early on, we were having one of those deep getting-to-know-each-other talks, and she asked me how many people I'd been with. I told her, very confidently, 3. That was a lie. A big one. At the time, my actual number was somewhere between 15 and 20. Not outrageous, but definitely not 3. I could tell she was looking for reassurance, not brutal honesty. She wanted to feel like she wasn't being compared to some long list. So, I gave her the version of the truth that made her feel safe. We got into a relationship, and honestly, she ended up being the best experience I've ever had. It was passionate and fun. And the chemistry was unreal. I never corrected myself. The topic just never came up again, and I let the 3 lie live on. Sometimes I feel a little guilty about it, but at the same time, I know being fully honest back then might have messed up something that turned out to be really good. So yeah, not proud of the lie, but I don't regret it either. Story 19. Back when I was in the military, I lived in one of those newer apartment-style barracks. A girl from my unit lived in the room right next to mine, exact same layout, same everything. One day she knocks on my door and says her hot water isn't working and asks if she can use my shower. I'm like, yeah, no problem, because I figured it was a simple maintenance issue. She goes in and closes the bathroom door. A minute later she calls out, "Hey, how do I work your shower?" So, I walked in, and she's standing there completely bare. I swear I just froze for a second, then pretended not to notice anything, turned the shower on for her, and awkwardly walked back out like a damn Boy Scout. Didn't think much of it at the time, just figured she was being casual about it or whatever. Fast forward a few months and I am getting ready to PCS permanent change of station, and she casually drops, "By the way, that was me trying to make a move on you." It hit me like a truck. Of course it was. We had the exact same shower, same unit, same plumbing, central water heater. She knew exactly how to work that shower. She just wanted to see if I'd take the hint. To this day, I still feel like the dumbest man alive for missing one of the most obvious signs in hookup history. Story 20. I once told a girl I was super into astrology because she wouldn't stop talking about her star sign. In reality, I don't know jack about it, and actually think it's all kinds of nonsense. But she was really into it, like pulling out charts, talking about the moon phases, telling me how we were cosmically aligned or whatever. So I just went with it. I started throwing around vague stuff like, "Yeah, totally, I think it's all about energy and vibes," and nodding like I actually knew what a rising sign was. That night, we ended up banging, leading me to believe that everything was under my control. But nope, she kept texting me afterward, asking about my sign's deeper traits, compatibility stuff, and what I thought about Mercury retrograde. I had to keep Googling everything in real time just to sound legit. For like 2 weeks, I lived a double life as a fake astrologist bro. Eventually, she caught on and called me out, but to my surprise, she was weirdly chill about it. Just said something like, "I figured you were faking it, but you were cute about it." So yeah, it technically worked, but I still can't hear the word Gemini without breaking into a cold sweat. Story 21. Years ago, I read a random magazine article about feng shui while waiting at the dentist's office. I didn't think much of it at the time. That same evening, I met this girl at a bar, and for reasons I still can't fully explain, I told her I was a feng shui expert who had just come back from studying in Japan. I even threw in a bit about ancient energy flows and room harmony, or some nonsense I barely understood. She was super into it and asked if I could come over and evaluate her apartment. I said yes, of course. The expert was in. I walked around her place, doing that thoughtful nod thing, occasionally pointing at stuff like, "Yeah, this mirror is definitely blocking your energy pathway," or "Your bed should face the door, but not directly." Classic mistake. I moved some furniture, flipped a rug, and rotated a lamp, just full-on winging it, and then I told her that her feng shui was totally realigned. Apparently, I also realigned something else, because we ended up sleeping together. Looking back, I can't believe she bought it. But hey, never underestimate the power of confidently delivered BS and rearranged furniture. Story 22. Years ago, I was doing K with a friend, and we got into this weirdly deep conversation about what extra body parts we'd want if we could have any. He said wings, going full angel mode. I mid-K-hole and not fully tethered to reality. Blurted out that I'd want 2 dongs and not just for fun. I proudly claimed I'd be famous for bringing a whole new meaning to DP. We both lost it laughing. Fast forward a while later, and I was at a bong shop, chatting up the girl behind the counter. Things were going well. We were flirting, vibing, and I was feeling confident. Then out of nowhere, that same friend from the night runs up, grinning like an idiot, and goes, "Did he tell you about his 2 dongs?" Then just leaves. Doesn't explain a thing. I froze, completely stunned, no idea how to play it off. She saw me fumbling for words, clearly flustered, and instead of being weirded out, she just blushed and asked me out on a date. I never got around to clarifying the whole thing. Maybe I was afraid the truth would ruin the magic? Anyway, the look on her face when she finally saw I was disappointingly average in that department was priceless. I think she genuinely expected something legendary. Story 23. As a young woman, I was an international flight attendant. As such, I'd traveled all over the world and thought I'd be more attractive if I were from some of those exotic locales. So, I'd be from Casablanca, Tanzania, Tavian Island, Bora Bora, etc. Places most people had never been. Still, I had, so I could easily fake my way through a conversation and into the bed of any available traveler I desired. In hindsight, a pretty hot and loose 23-year-old stewardess could bet done the trick even if she was just from California. What a loser I was. However, I did meet my husband that way. He was pretty pissed. I had lied to him for 3 months, but the jig was up when he met my family, and they weren't so foreign. Thankfully, he forgave me. We've been married for 25 years, and just yesterday, I had the opportunity to make a joke about it while watching a movie with a flyover of the Maldives. I said, "Look, that's my childhood home." I was from the Maldives for him. He laughed like I hadn't heard in a while. Story 24. This wasn't me, but my brother, and it's still one of the funniest things I've ever witnessed. Back in college, my 2 brothers and I shared a townhouse. We all look very similar, like could pass as triplets. Similar. One night, we threw a party that ended up being packed with a ton of Brazilian foreign exchange students. Everyone was drinking, music was blasting, it was chaos in the best way. At some point, I walked into the kitchen and caught my oldest brother talking to this Brazilian girl, but with the worst fake German accent I've ever heard in my life. Like cartoon villain levels of bad. He was going full I am from Munich, very far from here energy. When she asked about us, clearly confused why he had 2 identical roommates, he just smiled and said, "They are my roommates. Yeah, just a coincidence, we look alike." I had to walk away before I lost it, laughing. To this day, I don't know if she bought it, but she stuck around with him for the rest of the night. So maybe that horrible fake German charm actually worked. Story 25. 4 old university flatmates, and I used to catch up after we graduated and got our first jobs. We would take the piss out of each other by making outlandish claims, which sounded cool but unbelievable. The corrections made it believable but still cool. "He's a dolphin trainer. Haha. No, I am not. I measure water quality at various aquariums and aquatic parks. That includes the dolphin areas. We also take swabs from various surfaces. So yes, I do sometimes get in the dolphin pool, but I am certainly not a dolphin trainer." Girls suddenly believed it. My mate was a touring car driver. Except, no, he wasn't. He was on the technical team focused on tires, so he did get to take the car for a spin occasionally. Another was a spy. Except, no, he wasn't. He was a civil servant who coordinated joint operations between Men.I-6 and the Met Police. So, more of an accountant/pencil pusher than even a policeman. Something about the climb down made you endearing, but there was still an element of cool about it all. It worked a few times for some of the boys. Story 26. The other way around, but I had a girl once walk out in the middle of a date because apparently I smelled like crap. Like she made a big deal of it, sprayed me in public and everything. It was embarrassing, but I was like, screw it, okay, I'll change up my deodorant and make extra sure my clothes don't have mildew or whatever for the next girl. I showered and wore freshly washed clothes, so that's about all I could think of to do. Then, she starts messaging me relentlessly about how I need to go to her apartment. I told her no. What the heck? She just sprayed me in public and then walked out on our date. I was going to go to the art museum alone. She starts sending vague threats and eventually bullies me into going over there. I get to her apartment, and she says, "Oh, that's the problem. Your clothes smell. Take them off." Story 27. The first time I slept with my wife, I used a mix of a little lie and some reverse psychology. We had just started dating, and things were heating up, but she suddenly hit me. I don't sleep with someone until I really know them well. Now, I could have played the respectful card, nodded, and backed off, and I probably would, Viv, if I wasn't already mentally halfway undressed. Instead, I leaned back casually and said, "Yeah, I don't think I sleep with you just yet either." She paused, gave me this look like I'd just thrown down a challenge. A few minutes later, we were all over each other. Not my proudest or most noble moment, but hey, here we are, years later, married. Story 28. So this girl was hitting on me hard at a bar, and honestly, I wasn't that into it. I wasn't trying to be rude, but I just wanted to be left alone. So I told her I was a vampire, like dead serious. Just straight up, "Yeah, I'm a vampire. I feed at night. It's kind of a curse." You'd think that would send someone packing, right? Wrong. She was into it. Like weirdly into it. Thought it was mysterious or whatever. A few minutes later, she's under the table at the bar, and yeah, things escalated fast from there. We ended up going back to her place. And, well, let's just say I didn't need to bite her neck to leave a mark. I tried to be weird on purpose, but ended up getting laid. Story 29. So this happened a few years ago when I was trying to impress this girl I met at a friend's birthday party. She was a self-proclaimed foodie, like the type who knew all the Michelin-starred restaurants in town, talked about sous vide techniques, and probably had more knives in her kitchen than I had socks. I, on the other hand, could barely make instant noodles without burning them. Anyway, when the conversation turned to cooking, she casually said, "I sit looking for a guy who can cook, like really cook, not just microwave stuff or order takeout." I panicked, but instead of coming clean, I went full drama mode and said, "Actually, I'm kind of an award-winning chef." Then I threw in some jargon like farm-to-table and seasonal fusion to sound legit. She lit up, clearly impressed, and asked what kind of award I won. I blurted something about a local cooking competition in college where I wowed the judges with a deconstructed shepherd's pie. Fast forward to date night. I invited her over for dinner, planning to order fancy takeout and call it my own, but as the evening approached, the guilt was eating me alive. So, I did what any good liar would do. I spent hours on YouTube watching cooking tutorials on how to make shepherd's pie, how to plate like a pro, and even how to fake garnishing. I bought all the ingredients and somehow managed to assemble a half-decent dish. The crust was a little burnt, and the filling was basically mashed potatoes with some mystery meat, but hey, it looked fancy. She took a bite, paused, then smiled and said, "Wow, this is really good. I'm impressed." I nearly cried. We ended up spending the night cooking. Well, I mostly pretended to know what I was doing while she gave instructions, and it somehow turned into a 3-month thing. Eventually, I confessed that I wasn't actually an award-winning chef, and that the shepherd's pie was basically a YouTube experiment gone right. She laughed so hard she cried and said it was one of the sweetest lies she'd ever heard. Story 30. So, I met this girl at the gym. She was super into fitness and really passionate about veganism. Like, she carried her own snacks everywhere and was always dropping facts about plant-based protein and how real athletes don't eat meat. I was definitely not vegan. I liked burgers, chicken wings, and whatever else wasn't nailed down. But I wanted to impress her, so when she asked if I was vegan, I just blurted out, "Yeah, totally. Been plant-based for over a year." I tried to figure out what plant-based actually meant. Spoiler, it basically meant no meat, but I didn't know all the hidden stuff in sauces and supplements. Our first date was at this trendy vegan cafe, and I sat there sweating bullets, eating what felt like a pile of leaves while she went on about quinoa and chia seeds. I pretended to love every bite and nodded at the right moments. Later that week, she invited me to her place for a meal prep session. I thought, okay, how hard can it be? But she whipped out tofu, jackfruit, nutritional yeast, and all kinds of ingredients I'd never heard of. So, I faked confidence, chopped some veggies, and tossed some spices in a pan, hoping it would all magically come together. I even Googled how to cook tofu under the table. We ended up cooking and laughing, and by the end of the night, we were making out in her kitchen surrounded by containers of questionable vegan food. I lasted about 2 months pretending to be vegan before I couldn't keep the act up anymore. Safe to say, it did not end well. Story 31. At a restaurant where I used to work, my girlfriend was standing on the bottom shelf of a big fridge, trying to grab something from the top. I reached up, grabbed the item for her, and jokingly told her to cut it out because my sister had died exactly that way, crushed by a falling fridge. She felt super bad for me, getting all sad talking to my coworker about how tragic it was. That's when he casually dropped that I don't actually have a sister. It was a total lie I made up on the spot to scare her into being careful. Well, apparently inventing these dramatic, outlandish stories to keep people safe is oddly attractive. We ended up dating soon after, and now we're married. Life is weird. Story 32. In college, my roommate used to regularly tell restaurants that it was my birthday as a joke. It was embarrassing when the waitstaff would come out with cake and get the table to sing happy birthday. We went out to dinner with some of our friends and some of his girlfriend's friends. The waitstaff brings out cake, and the table sings happy birthday. I turned bright red. I spent the rest of the night talking to a girl whom I had only met once previously. Turns out she was into whatever astrology sign people born in November have. I listened to her talk about something she's into and agreed that I am totally the way she described. I'm not into astrology. I don't even know what star sign is associated with my real birthday. At the end of the night, I got a birthday BJ and her phone number, called her a couple of times, and never heard back. Found out through the roommate's girlfriend that she was pissed. I wasn't a unicorn sunset librarian with a cancer boat or something like that. Story 33. One time at my office, I had to use the women's bathroom because the men's was full and nature was calling urgently. While inside a stall, I overheard 2 women chatting. One was a pretty hot coworker complaining about how she couldn't find good guys on dating apps who actually matched the specific qualities she wanted. She said she purposely left those qualities off her profile so the guys would naturally show them later. Well, I decided to quietly become that guy for her without making a big deal out of it. I started casually matching everything she said she was looking for and acted like it was no big deal. 2 weeks later, her friend set us up officially, and I agreed. What started as a low-key setup turned into a 3-year on-and-off dating/friend with benefits situation until she switched jobs. Story 34. I'm a lesbian who recently slept with a non-binary person, just a dating app hookup. I'm only attracted to femininity really, but they were assigned female at birth, and so a big part of their gender euphoria comes from being perceived as masculine instead of feminine, even though masculine appearances kind of repel me. Every time, after we banged, and after every time I bury my face in their incredible enormous chesticles, I think of some other trait I can point to that looks masculine and stuff. They love it. They blush every time. Yeah, friend, your barely visible arm hair totally makes you look like a man. If they ever start identifying as a man instead of non-binary, I'll stop lying to them and just wish them well and stuff. I mean, at that point, it's just a matter of time before they grow facial hair anyway, and no way of making out with a dude. Story 35. I've never really been the type to lie, just to hook up with someone. But I have definitely lied to stay in the situation once I was already deep in it, literally and figuratively. I was in a messy situation, having an affair with my brother's girl. Yeah, I know, already off to a terrible start. But the twist is my wife knew about it. She wasn't thrilled, obviously, but she gave me what I thought was her one rule. I don't want to see it, as in, don't rub it in her face, don't let it be obvious, and don't disrespect her by flaunting it. So, one day, we're at home, and I'm getting a little handsy with my brother's girl when my wife walks in mid-hand J. Not full-on getting laid, but enough to be awkward, and well, definitely against the don't let me see it guideline. Except apparently, that wasn't actually the rule, or at least that's what she now said. According to her, The real rule was that if I was going to mess around, she needed to be present so it wasn't happening behind her back like what was going down with my brother. She looked me dead in the eyes and asked if this was the first time I'd done something behind her back, and I could tell right then that if I said no it was game over. So I lied. I told her, yes, this is the first time, and sold it like my life depended on it. The truth was, that wasn't the first time. Not even close. But at that moment, I knew she was feeling betrayed, because the rule, whether misunderstood or not, felt broken. I also knew that telling the truth, even if it was just a miscommunication, would end everything. So yeah, I lied. Not proud of it, but that lie kept the relationship going a little longer, even if things were never really the same after that. Story 36. I met this girl through a mutual friend. She was tense and stressed from school, and mentioned she was looking for a guy who was gentle but strong, like someone who knows pressure points. I immediately said I was a certified massage therapist. I had never massaged anything more complex than a couch cushion, but I had watched 2 YouTube videos about back pain once, so I felt qualified. When I gave her the first massage, I just applied medium pressure and made up fake massage terms like, I set activating your shoulder chakra now, and let me realign the trapezius nerve bundle. She let out a soft wow and I knew it was working. That massage turned into cuddling, which turned into a lot more. We hooked up that night, and for a while she kept asking for massages. I started learning real techniques just to keep the act going. But somewhere along the way, the lie turned into a hobby. Story 37. When I was a single guy, I was a party animal and a playboy. I lived alone, and my house was always the party spot. I was having one of my usual Friday night parties and told this girl who really liked me to stay the night, and that in the morning we'd go out and have breakfast, and that we'd spend the weekend together. She did. And the next morning I woke up to a car horn. It was my friends picking me up to do our usual breakfast hangover cure at our favorite Mexican restaurant. I told her she had to leave. She didn't have a ride, so I made her call for a ride and waited outside as I was going to lock up my house. I'll never forget driving away from my house, looking back and seeing her just sitting there on my porch waiting for a ride. Yeah, I was a dirtbag back then. Probably why I went through a few relationships where I got used and cheated on. Karma definitely got me. Story 38. At a Ren fair a while back, I found myself getting friendly with some of the actors and workers of the fair. I was invited to a drinking and hanging session after, and hit it off with a redhead dressed as a fairy. One guy just assumed I worked there, and I just went along with it. I really wanted to sleep with this fairy. Mostly, it was little white lies and head nods until I was asked to operate heavy machinery. You better believe I was like, yeah, no problem, when they asked me to help with tying the ropes to hold up some big attraction. I still wonder if my shoddy knots ever failed at an inopportune time later on. Anyway, after all that, the fairy lady passed out from too much Goldschlager, and I ended up sleeping in the back of one of the barns, sandwiched between a horse and the 300-pound blacksmith. Good times. Story 39. So, I was talking to this girl I really liked, and I knew she was super into guys who could cook. The problem is, I can cook. But I wasn't about to experiment with something new and screw it up for a first impression. So, I pulled off what I thought was a smooth little food con job. I ordered takeout from Olive Garden, brought some Tupperware with me, and carefully transferred the food into it, like I just finished slaving over the stove. Then I dropped it off at her job as a homemade lunch. She loved it, told me it was amazing, and I played it off all casual like, oh, it's just something I threw together. That little stunt worked better than I expected, because she ended up coming over for dinner that weekend. And this time, I actually did cook one of the few dishes I've made 100 times and know I can absolutely nail. She was impressed again, and the rest is history. Not proud of the Olive Garden deception, but hey, I delivered on the second round. Story 40. My story begins with an incredibly naive 19-year-old homeschooled girl. She was utterly sheltered from guys, having never had a boyfriend, and I met her and her family doing sports. This girl had an undeniably voluptuous hourglass figure that effortlessly drew attention. As a fast food manager in my late 20s with one foot out the door into a new career, I helped her get a job. It wasn't long before she developed a huge crush on a male coworker. One night, she messaged me, desperate to understand why this coworker wouldn't talk to her. I'd been playfully teasing her that I knew the reason, which was a complete lie. Our back and forth snaps about him late at night started innocently, with pictures just showing her shoulder or hinting at her bra strap. I made a joking comment about her bra with a thirsty reaction. When she noticed my response, she got bold and then sent very suggestive snaps with her goods on full display, encouraging me to talk. Caught off guard, I did what any guy would do. I fabricated a story she completely bought. Even tricked her by claiming some photos were blurry and didn't count, just to get her to send more. It was clearly her first time overtly using her body to get what she wanted. Naturally, I wasn't the only one caught in her web. She was juggling every male coworker in the store who was after her. She even pursued the one who already had a girlfriend, treating it like a personal challenge. Since he was a friend, I confessed what was happening, and our dynamic quickly shifted into a strange love triangle. He admitted she'd thrown herself at him, and he fell for her seduction. As she became drunk with her new power, she'd often brag to me about her exploits, utterly convinced her body could get her anything she wanted. It was incredibly hot whenever she'd turn that power on me. I'd try to resist her demands at first, to stand my ground, but my willpower was useless. Any time I denied her, she'd send a mix of risque snaps, knowing exactly the effect they'd have on me. Then later, when we were alone, she'd simply take my hands and press them against her chesticles, asking if I truly wanted to say no. My brain would just turn to goo 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 ga mush, and I would agree to anything. Her inexperience, oddly, was a massive turn-on, fueling this bizarre dynamic. This overwhelming lust became an addictive drug I craved more and more. I seriously couldn't control myself. Her demands escalated weekly. It started with seemingly small demands, free food during our shifts, or getting me to cover her chores around the store. But then she kept testing my boundaries further, always dangling the constant threat of cutting off our relation. She pushed for late-night rides, concert tickets, and even convinced me to give her a raise. I quickly became her plug, buying her vapes and alcohol, a role she loved to flaunt to her friends. My coworkers and I gave her the nickname Black Widow because every guy she dated or dumped seemed to spiral into dark place after she discarded them. She was a real-life femme fatale. Eventually, I had to move on. It was later I found out she'd developed an affair with the owner, despite him being married. He used to bring her envelopes of cash and was paying her double what other employees at her level made, even more than the managers and me. Story 41. I basically lied about every single part of my life to someone I had fallen for. I wanted her to like me so badly that I crafted this version of myself that didn't even exist. Different hobbies, different values, even a different past. It wasn't just one lie, it was a full-on fake identity I kept up for months. And it worked for a while. She liked that version of me. We got close. I was happy, but only on the surface. Deep down, I knew it was built on total lies, and eventually, the cracks started showing. She dumped me. Hard. And not because she found out everything, but because even the fake version of me wasn't enough to keep her. Meanwhile, I was left in pieces, realizing I never even gave her a chance to love me, just the character I created. It wrecked me so badly that I ended up in therapy, and I've been working through it ever since. She's now in a happy relationship with someone else, and I'm still trying to unlearn everything that made me think lying was the only way to be loved. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.